The screen is open, the cursor's blinking. You're not scared. You've already decided you're not going all the way. Your body knows it before you admit it. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows. Your intensity dips just enough. Maybe later. You save it as a draft. Again, it's not a lack of ability, it's strategy. You lower your effort before reality gets a vote. That way, if it fails, it won't expose you. You don't lose at the end. You arrange the loss at the beginning, quietly, and you call it being smart. Stay if that hit. You already know you're doing it. That's the part that makes this hard to ignore. You don't wake up one morning and destroy your life in one dramatic collapse. You do it in quiet installments, in small internal decisions no one else can see. There's a moment before every risk, before you send the message, before you apply, before you speak up in the meeting, before you commit fully to something that could actually change your direction. And in that moment, something inside you leans back. Not loudly, not emotionally, just a subtle internal verdict. This probably won't work. It sounds reasonable, it sounds experienced, it sounds like someone who's learned from the past. But look closer. It's not experience, it's pre-loss. You are not failing at the end. You are withdrawing at the beginning. You don't test reality, you protect yourself from it. Albert Bandura wrote that people's beliefs about their capabilities influence how much effort they put in, how long they persist, and how resilient they are when they face obstacles. Not their intelligence, not their resources, their belief. If you believe your effort won't change the outcome, your effort shrinks. If your effort shrinks, your results weaken. If your results weaken, your belief hardens, and the cycle closes like a locked jaw. You think self-sabotage looks dramatic. It doesn't. It looks like this. You draft the email but don't send it. You open the application and tell yourself you'll finish it tomorrow. You start the workout plan and skip when the first soreness hits. You feel excited about someone, then pull away the moment you sense uncertainty. You begin a project with energy, then interpret the first delay as a sign you're not cut out for it. You call this caution. You call it maturity. You call it knowing yourself. But what you call self-knowledge may just be a verdict you never questioned. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a sentence. Maybe it was subtle. You're not leadership material. You're too emotional. You're not disciplined. You're just not that type. Maybe no one even said it directly. Maybe it formed through comparison, through watching someone else get praised while you were overlooked, through one humiliating moment that burned deeper than you admitted. You didn't just remember it, you built around it. You organized your behavior to stay consistent with it. When something goes wrong, you say, "There it is, that's me." When something goes right, you shrink it. It was luck. They were just being nice. It wasn't that big of a deal. You refuse to allow success to contradict your identity. That's loyalty, not to your potential, to your limitation. And here's the uncomfortable shift. If your belief about yourself is inaccurate, then your entire pattern of avoidance is unnecessary. That's heavier than failure, because failure hurts once. But realizing you've been playing small for years out of habit, that's a different kind of weight. So you stay in partial effort, partial commitment, partial visibility. You give 70%, so if it collapses, you can say, "I didn't really try." That sentence has protected your ego more times than you'll admit. It has also quietly eroded your trajectory. Destruction doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like erosion. The conversation you never initiate, the boundary you soften, the raise you never ask for, the skill you never develop because you quit during the awkward stage, the relationship you sabotage by pulling back before it gets real. You don't implode your life, you dilute it. And dilution is slow enough that you can pretend nothing is wrong. Bandura also argued that people avoid tasks not because they lack ability, but because they doubt their ability to influence outcomes. Read that carefully. You don't withdraw because you can't handle it. You withdraw because you believe your effort is irrelevant. Why fight if the result is already decided? Why push if the ending is fixed? So you downshift your ambition. You lower your standards for yourself before life has the chance to. You shrink your goals to something you can fail at safely, and then you call it realism. But realism without experimentation is fear dressed in logic. Look at your daily life, not in theory, in specifics. How many times have you avoided a simple conversation because it'll probably go badly anyway? How many times have you abandoned a project after the first friction, as if friction was proof you were wrong to start? How many times have you decided not to pursue something because people like me don't usually succeed at that? You say you're protecting yourself from disappointment, but what you're really protecting is an old internal narrative. Because if you went all in and it worked, you'd have to rewrite who you think you are. And rewriting identity destabilizes everything. Your relationships shift, your standards rise, your excuses disappear. There is comfort in smallness. Smallness is predictable. When you operate below your capacity, you don't threaten the structure of your current life. Other people stay comfortable with you. No one accuses you of changing. No one feels displaced by your growth. When you start speaking more clearly, someone calls you intense. When you stop apologizing unnecessarily, someone jokes that you've changed. When you persist where you used to quit, someone rolls their eyes and says you're doing too much. The system reacts. It prefers you consistent, even if consistency means self-limitation. So the moment you stretch beyond your old script, friction appears. And that old voice returns. See? This is why we don't try. If you're not aware, you retreat. Back to the familiar cage, because at least in the cage, you know how to survive. But here's the blade. You are not afraid of failing. You are afraid of disproving your limitation. Because if your limitation is false, then your past restraint becomes your responsibility. You can't blame fate. You can't blame timing. You have to admit you've been negotiating your own effort. That sentence burns. So instead, you maintain plausible deniability. I wasn't fully committed. It just wasn't the right season. I didn't really care that much. You didn't fail. You pre-lost. And you did it quietly so no one would see, but you saw. You always see. And that's why it lingers. That's why there's a subtle dissatisfaction that never leaves. Not because life is cruel, because you are not aligned with your own capacity. To become stronger, you have to stop being loyal to your weakness. Weakness has history. It has emotional logic. It has memories attached. Letting it go feels like betraying an old version of yourself. But if you don't, you will continue rehearsing limitation until it feels permanent. If you already decided to lose in certain areas of your life, are you willing to revoke that decision? Not with motivation, with behavior. One uncomfortable conversation you don't avoid. One application you submit even if doubt is loud. One project you stay with after the first wave of frustration. One moment where you act as if your effort actually matters. You don't need certainty. You need exposure. Confidence follows endured action. Bandura emphasized mastery experiences for a reason. You build belief by surviving difficulty, not by waiting to feel ready. Ready is a fantasy created by avoidance. No one feels stable while challenging their own identity. Growth destabilizes. That doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you're expanding, and expansion feels like risk. So here's where it tightens. If you continue rehearsing limitation, you will perfect it. If you rehearse expansion, you will build it. Both require repetition. Only one changes your trajectory. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about withdrawing the decision you made years ago without realizing it. The decision that said, I don't win. If this confrontation unsettled you, stay. Subscribe. Not for comfort, for interruption. This space exists to expose the contracts you've made with your own limitation. And if you want to examine that contract more closely, there's a book called The Forgotten Agreement by Luciana Santos. It's not a solution. It's a mirror. You'll find it in the pinned comment. But before you look anywhere else, answer this honestly. Where in your life have you already decided to lose? Write it down. Because once you see the decision clearly, you can't pretend it's destiny anymore. There's something else you haven't admitted. You don't just sabotage opportunities, you sabotage identity transitions. Every time life tries to move you into a bigger version of yourself, you hesitate long enough for the door to close. Not because you can't handle it, because you don't recognize yourself inside it. A promotion opportunity appears, and instead of asking, "Can I grow into this?" you ask, "Who do I think I am?" a healthy relationship begins forming, and instead of relaxing into it, you scan for flaws, for exits, for signs it won't last. Money starts increasing, and you unconsciously increase spending, lower standards, or hesitate to expand because stability feels unfamiliar. You don't sabotage events, you sabotage upgrades, because upgrades require identity expansion, and identity expansion feels like psychological death. The old version of you survives on predictability, predictability of struggle, predictability of being underestimated, predictability of almost. If you fully win, something old inside you disappears, and that part resists. This is why you start strong and collapse at friction. The friction isn't the problem. The friction signals growth. But growth threatens the familiar self-image. So your nervous system confuses expansion with danger. You feel anxiety. You interpret anxiety as proof you shouldn't continue. You withdraw. You call it intuition. It wasn't intuition. It was protection of identity. There's a phrase you use that gives it away. That's just not me. Who decided that? When? Based on what data? Or was it one failed attempt 5 years ago that you never retested? Bandura's framework on self-efficacy makes something clear. Belief is not static. It is shaped by repeated experience. But you stopped collecting new experiences. You froze the evidence. You decided the case was closed. And now you live as if growth would be betrayal. Look at how this plays out in ordinary moments. You're in a meeting. You have something valuable to say. You rehearse it in your head. Then someone else speaks. The window closes. You tell yourself, it wasn't that important, but it was. You're dating someone who treats you well. You start noticing consistency. Instead of allowing it, you look for the flaw. You test them subtly. You withdraw slightly. You create emotional distance. When tension appears, you say, "See, I knew it." You wanted proof, so you manufactured it. You receive unexpected praise. Your body tightens instead of opening. You deflect, you joke, you minimize. Because if you accept it, you must update your identity. And updating identity destabilizes your narrative. You think your problem is motivation. It's not. It's coherence. Your behavior is coherent with your self-image. If your self-image is limited, your behavior will protect that limitation. If your self-image is fragile, your behavior will avoid exposure. If your self-image assumes loss, your behavior will guarantee it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You are extremely disciplined, just not in the direction you think. You are disciplined in maintaining the same internal verdict. You are consistent in protecting your limitation. You are loyal to the story that keeps you small, that loyalty has cost you more than failure ever could. Because failure teaches, self-sabotage freezes. Failure builds resilience. Self-sabotage builds stagnation. Failure happens after effort. Self-sabotage prevents effort. And here is the line you need to hear clearly. You are not losing because life is against you. You are losing because you already decided you would. Quietly, internally, before the first move. That's why this hurts. Because this isn't about external barriers. It's about internal agreements. Agreements you made to avoid exposure. Agreements you made to avoid humiliation. Agreements you made when you were younger and less equipped. Those agreements are outdated, but you're still honoring them. So now the question sharpens. If you stopped pre-deciding loss, if you stopped interpreting friction as verdict, if you stayed through the awkward middle instead of quitting at discomfort, who would you become? Not theoretically, practically. What conversations would you initiate? What risks would you tolerate? What standards would you raise? What environments would you outgrow? Because here's the existential layer. If you continue like this for 5 more years, nothing dramatic will happen. You won't collapse. You'll just plateau quietly. You'll watch other people move. You'll rationalize why their path isn't yours. You'll say you value balance. You'll say you don't need that level of ambition. But internally, you'll know. You'll know you negotiated with your own potential. And that knowledge is corrosive. At some point, this stops being about success. It becomes about integrity. Are you acting in alignment with what you are capable of? Or are you acting in alignment with the fear that defined you at 20? You don't need to become fearless. You need to stop letting fear write the ending, because right now it is. And every time you retreat early, you reinforce the ending. Every time you say, "It probably won't work," you reduce effort before reality even responds. You don't need proof you can win. You need proof you can stay. Stay when it's awkward. Stay when it's uncertain. Stay when you feel temporarily incompetent. Because competence is built in the phase you keep escaping. And here's the second blade. If you revoke your decision to lose, people will notice. Not everyone will celebrate it. Some will resist. Some will withdraw. Some will prefer the old version of you. That reaction is not a warning. It's confirmation. Confirmation that your shift is real. So I'll leave you with something that doesn't comfort. If nothing external changes in your life, but you stop quitting internally at the starting line, how different would the next year look? Not magically, mechanically. Because your effort would change, your persistence would change, your exposure would change, and if effort changes, outcomes follow. That's not inspiration, that's structure. Now answer this without theory. Where exactly have you already decided to lose? Not where you failed. Where you pre-withdrew, where you reduced effort before testing reality. Write it down. Because once you name the decision, you can't pretend it was fate. And if you can't pretend it was fate, then you have to choose again. There's one more layer you haven't looked at. You say you want more growth, more impact, more stability, more confidence, more fulfillment. But wanting more while identifying as someone who doesn't win creates internal contradiction. And contradiction drains energy. You wake up tired not because you're doing too much, but because you're internally split. One part of you wants expansion, another part is protecting limitation. So every decision becomes heavy. Every opportunity becomes a debate. Every risk becomes a courtroom. You don't move cleanly. You negotiate. That negotiation is exhausting. And here's the part that's hard to swallow. You trust your doubt more than your desire. Desire says move. Doubt says retreat. You call doubt realistic. You call desire naive. But what if you reverse that? What if your desire is the signal of capacity, and your doubt is just an outdated protection mechanism? Because doubt feels intelligent. It references past pain, it anticipates embarrassment, it calculates risk. Desire doesn't explain itself. It just pulls. And you have been trained to mistrust what pulls. So you shrink. You shrink in rooms where you could lead. You shrink in relationships where you could ask for more. You shrink in projects that require persistence. And then you analyze why you feel unfulfilled. You don't feel unfulfilled because life is withholding from you. You feel unfulfilled because you are withholding from life. There's a difference. One makes you a victim. The other makes you responsible. Responsibility is heavier because it removes the comfort of maybe someday. It forces today. If you stopped quitting at the first sign of discomfort, if you stopped interpreting anxiety as prophecy, if you stayed 5 minutes longer in difficult conversations, if you submitted the application instead of perfecting it endlessly, if you acted before feeling fully ready, your trajectory would shift, not dramatically overnight, but undeniably. And here's the second quote that matters. Bandura emphasized that self-efficacy is built through mastery experiences, through repeatedly confronting challenges and discovering you can influence outcomes, not through thinking differently, through acting and surviving the friction. You have been waiting to feel capable. Capability is built in the arena you avoid. You don't become confident and then act. You act and become confident. But acting threatens the old narrative, and that old narrative has protected you from humiliation. So, you defend it. You defend your own ceiling. You say, I just don't want to get my hopes up. But hope isn't the threat. Exposure is. Because if you expose your full effort and it still fails, there's nowhere to hide. But here's what you haven't considered. If you expose your full effort and it works, your entire identity shifts. And identity shifts destabilize relationships. They destabilize routines. They destabilize your internal hierarchy of excuses. You will outgrow conversations. You will outgrow environments. You may outgrow people. And growth always costs something. Stagnation costs more. Stagnation costs 5 years of almost. It costs watching others move while you rationalize. It costs that quiet internal voice that says, you could have done more. That voice doesn't go away. It waits. It waits at night. It waits during quiet moments. It waits when someone else succeeds in an area you abandoned. And it whispers, you quit early. Not because you're incapable, Because you decided. So let's make this surgical. You don't need to fix your personality. You don't need a new identity from scratch. You need to revoke one internal decision. I lose. That's it. Not in every area, but in the specific ones you quietly withdrew from. Revoke that decision. Not with affirmations, with exposure, with staying, with behavior that contradicts the old script. And yes, it will feel unnatural. Yes, you will feel temporarily unstable. Yes, people will react. That's the cost of upgrading identity. So here is the existential edge. If you continue rehearsing limitation, it will become your biography. If you rehearse expansion, it will become your direction. Both are built through repetition. Both feel uncomfortable at first. Only one honors your actual capacity. So answer this without escaping into theory. If nothing about your intelligence is broken, if nothing about your potential is fixed at its current level, if your limitation is partly rehearsed, then what are you protecting? Your ego, your history, your familiarity with smallness? Because once you see that the decision to lose was internal, you cannot blame fate anymore. And once you cannot blame fate, you must choose again and again and again. If this confrontation disrupted you, stay here. Subscribe, not for comfort, for pressure, because pressure exposes structure. And if you want to examine the psychological agreement you made with your own limitation, there's a book called The Forgotten Agreement by Luciana Santos. It's not a promise, it's a mirror. You'll find it in the pinned comment. But before you click anywhere else, sit with this. Where exactly have you already decided to lose? Write the area, not the excuse. The area, career, relationships, health, money, voice. Because once you name it clearly, you can't pretend it's destiny. And if it's not destiny, then the next move is yours. There is one last thing you need to face. If you truly stop sabotaging yourself, your life will not simply improve. It will destabilize first. Because the structure you've built around your limitation will crack. The friends who felt comfortable with your hesitation may feel threatened by your clarity. The partner who relied on your self-doubt may feel uneasy when you stop shrinking. The job that tolerated your partial effort may react when you begin asking for more. Growth is not just internal. It rearranges your ecosystem, and that is why you hesitate. Not because you can't handle success, because success forces reorganization. You say you want more responsibility, but responsibility means you can't blame invisibility anymore. You say you want confidence, but confidence removes the comfort of self-deprecation. You say you want impact, but impact means visibility, and visibility means evaluation. You are not afraid of failure, you are afraid of being seen trying fully. Because once you are seen trying fully, there is no exit strategy, no soft excuse, no, I didn't really mean it. There is only effort, and effort exposes capacity. So you reduce effort in advance, you lower intensity, you hedge emotionally, you pre-disengage. That way, if it collapses, you can say, I wasn't all in. That sentence has been your shield. It has also been your ceiling. You don't sabotage because you're weak. You sabotage because you are protecting an identity that once kept you safe. But what kept you safe at 20 is suffocating you now. You are not that person anymore. But you're still obeying their fear. And that obedience has a cost. Not dramatic, incremental. 5 years of almost. 5 years of maybe next time. 5 years of watching others cross thresholds you approached but never entered. You will not wake up in crisis. You will wake up in plateau. And plateau is harder to confront than collapse. Because collapse forces change. Plateau allows rationalization. You can always say, it's fine. But is it? Be precise. Are you actually fine? Or are you tolerating a smaller life because it feels predictable? You say you value peace, but is it peace? Or is it controlled limitation? There is a difference. Peace expands. Limitation contracts. And contraction, repeated long enough, becomes personality. You start calling yourself cautious, practical, low maintenance. But beneath that is something sharper. You pre-decided the outcome. You decided you don't win there. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. And once the decision was made, your behavior aligned with it. That is the real mechanism. Your life is not an accident. It is aligned behavior. Aligned with belief. Aligned with identity. Aligned with internal verdict. If the verdict says I lose, the behavior guarantees it. If the verdict changes, the behavior must change, not perfectly, consistently. So here is the final edge. You cannot keep calling this fate. You cannot keep blaming personality. You cannot keep saying, that's just how I am. Because once you see that the decision was internal, you are responsible for the next one. And responsibility is uncomfortable. It means today matters. It means the next conversation matters. It means the next opportunity matters. It means your effort is no longer symbolic. It is structural. You don't need to reinvent yourself. You need to stop surrendering before reality even responds. You don't need certainty. You need endurance. You don't need to eliminate doubt. You need to move while it's present. And yes, something will die in this process. Not your life, your limitation, your familiar weakness, your rehearsed identity. Identity death feels like instability, but it is expansion in disguise. So here is the question you cannot avoid now. If you revoke the decision to lose, who do you become? And more importantly, what will you no longer tolerate? Sit with that, not comfortably, honestly. If this pressure matters to you, stay here. Subscribe. Not for motivation, for exposure, because exposure builds structure. And if you want to look directly at the psychological contract you made with your own limitation, there's a book called The Forgotten Agreement by Luciana Santos. It isn't a solution, it's a mirror. You'll find it in the pinned comment. But before anything else, answer this in the comments. In which area of your life have you already decided to lose? Not where you failed, where you withdrew before trying. Write the area: career, relationships, health, money, voice. Because once you name it, you can't pretend it's destiny. And once you can't pretend, you have to decide again. Who are you if you stop choosing small?